As Greg said, I'm here with my colleague Stephanie and my other colleague Jen, and we're going to be sharing some routines with you today. If you like to tweet, please feel free. Our hashtag is MetaTLC. So the title of our talk is Re-envisioning Early Childhood Routines, Empowering Young Minds to Think, and it's actually connected to my book, which is coming out in a couple of weeks. And the book's called Early Childhood Math Routines, Empowering Young Minds to Think. And this book has been a labor of love. It's been a number of years working on it, working in lots of classrooms with teachers and with coaches. And we think there's some fabulous routines in here that should help us really rethink our practice as early childhood teachers. Okay, a little background on us. If you don't know what Metamorphosis Teaching Learning Community is, you can always go to our website, but we're an organization of content coaches. Content coaching is our brand. You can read about what content coaching is in a book I wrote with Lucy West, and it's called Agents of Change, How Content Coaching Transforms Teaching and Learning. It's really a bestseller. No, you won't find it on the New York Times bestseller list, just kidding. The big thing is we're not a curriculum. We hear people saying, oh, we're doing Metamorphosis. You don't do Metamorphosis. Metamorphosis is the company. Content coaching is our brand. We don't develop curriculum, although there are curriculum materials in my book, but we don't think of ourselves as curriculum developers. We think of ourselves as practitioners, and practitioners who love to be in classrooms with teachers and children and coaches and really re-envisioning how mathematics is taught. All right, so a couple of questions to think about. We'll give you a minute to think about these. What routines do you use in your classroom? Why do you use them? That's probably one of the most important questions we can ask. Why do we use the routines we're using? How do these routines develop kids' ability to reason and communicate their thinking? So we'll give you 1 minute. All right, that's probably a virtual minute. The other big question is, given our current reality, which is really a kind of nightmare, but it's also kind of an interesting place to be because it's making a lot of us rethink what we do and how we do it. How might the routines we use translate to virtual learning or homeschooling? And that's a big question. And we'd like to think about some of the routines we're sharing with you today. They can actually be done by parents or done by teachers in virtual learning environments. So our agenda, we're very ambitious. Anyone who's ever worked with us knows we are ambitious people. And we have 5 routines we would like to share. Notice and Wonder, which is a pretty common routine. It's been around for a while, but we do it a little bit differently. A routine Jen and I created together called Who's Hiding, which is a really fun pre-KK routine. You can also do it in grade 1. Fair Not Fair is a routine I created years ago. It's actually pretty complex, the mathematics in it, but you can use it from pre-K to grade 1, maybe even in grade 2. A real like a word play game called You Say, I Say that has real potential to develop kids' problem-solving strategies and habits of mind. And a new game that's hot off the press. It's an interactive game that I built with my colleague Daniel Schur, and it's called Build Me. Okay, 4 types of routines that we have to keep in mind when we're thinking about routines, and there's lots of writing out there about routines, but the 4 main ones are housekeeping routines, management routines, learning, and we call them thinking routines, and discourse routines. Obviously, housekeeping routines, you'd probably do them every day, keeping your house clean, making your bed, doing that kind of stuff. Management routines, every good classroom teacher knows no classroom works without good management routines. Learning or thinking routines and discourse routines are a little trickier. Sometimes people think of them as being separate. We're going to share examples how both of these can go together. We think thinking routines are at the heart of learning, and you can do these kinds of things in 5 or 10 minutes, which is actually fabulous. And the building of talk or discourse into the routines is equally critical.
So Like Tony said, we're focusing on thinking routines in this session today. And what's interesting about that is you're going to notice that in some of our routines, the math may not be immediately apparent. And that's because we're thinking about developing underlying structures of thinking that are going to actually impact the development of big ideas in mathematics. So this list here are some of the critical ideas that can be developed with thinking routines. So there's the understanding of big ideas in math, there's problem solving strategies and habits of mind, and then there's communication skills that include students' ability to listen with the intent of understanding and not just saying what they want to say, the ability to speak with precision and clarity and the use of academic language, the ability to pose questions of the teacher, of their colleagues, of themselves. Then we have the ability to create conjectures, what ifs, and I think this is going to happen. And then within that, the ability to justify their thinking. So these are some of the big ideas that we're thinking about developing in the routines that we're going to be sharing with you today. And so for each routine that we share, we've created this framework to analyze the routine. And so we've thought about each routine in terms of language. How is this routine developing language? How is this routine working with students' social, emotional selves? And especially for early childhood, that is a core issue that we want to focus on, right, with young children. Then there's the ability to reason in mathematics and not just be little computers. And then finally, there's the ability or the thinking about the math content and problem solving. And so we're going to link each routine to all four of those criteria throughout our session today. And so without further ado, we're going to start off with our first routine, which is notice wonder. And this is a routine that some of you may know, some of you may use. And what's interesting is that in our organization, Metamorphosis, we have coaches that work from pre-K all the way through BC algebra, right? AP algebra. And so this is a routine that every single grade uses. And so we wanted to share with you a little bit of how this routine works. And it's a very simple routine that asks kids just these two questions. What do you notice? And what does it make you wonder, right? And so we're gonna just practice this ourselves. And then we're gonna think about why is this routine so powerful? And we're gonna do that by looking at an image that's in Tony's book. This is actually a painting by Eliza Donovan that's based on an actual photograph. And we've used this image with kindergarten classes and first grade classes. And so as you're looking at it, just take a few seconds to think about what you notice and what wonderings you might have. All right. So now that we've had a minute to think a little bit about this painting yourself, we're going to play through. I'm going to play through what students actually say. And it'll be interesting for you to think about comparing what were the things that you were noticing versus what are the things that kindergartners say. So in kindergarten, one student said, I see a house. I see water. Another student says, I see a rock. I see a red house. There's a house on a rock. So notice the way the house is getting modified and added onto and built upon. The house is in the water. I see yellow trees. I see snow on the trees. A wooden thing in front where people sit. There's a boat. There's a thing for when you're drowning. There's fog. And so then we had wonderings, and I'm imagining that many of you noticed the same things that the kids noticed. And the wonderings are great because I think the wonderings, it's surprising that kids think about the same things that we wonder. So here they are. Why is the house in the water? That's a silly place for a house, huh? Who built the house? Why would someone want to live there? Do they dive into the water? How do they get their food? They must be pescatarians. Will the house go in the water in a storm? They're thinking about the well-being of the inhabitants of the house. How many people live there? Are they afraid? I would be afraid if I lived in that house. Are they alone? Are they scared to be alone? What if there's lightning? All right, so that's a glimpse into what dialogue might look like in a notice wonder routine. And the way this routine works is we just slow down and have kids really just popcorn out all the things they notice and all the things they wonder. In Tony's book, there's actually a beautiful dialogue box that you'll be able to read through and be able to analyze some of the facilitation moves that the teacher makes in this routine. For the sake of time in our session today, we don't have time to go that deep, but it's something you can absolutely go back and reference when the book comes out. All right, so here's the routine. It is chock full of richness. And while the math isn't immediately apparent, let's start off thinking about language, precision of language. Notice the way the kids started modifying and building on the language of each other's, building vocabulary and thinking about what do we call some of the things in that picture, right? Some kids may not know some language and they could learn language from each other. Also, the ability to generate questions is a language goal, and that's not easy for young children. In terms of social emotional, there's nothing right and there's nothing wrong, right? So this is a routine that can build confidence and give students voice in a classroom where they may not have a lot of voice in terms of content. So we want to build students' confidence. We want to develop their listening skills so that they don't repeat things that other people already said. And then we want to build engagement, right? So engaging in the lesson. Now, here's where we start to think about the connections to math. And we think this is a really, really big one and a really important one, because in problem solving, no matter what grade we're talking about needing to have the ability to slow down to think, slowing down to make sense of the problem. If we're talking about school mathematics, if we're talking about life mathematics, life skills, you need to be able to slow down, analyze all the information, attend to details, and make connections between known and unknown. And so this is a way to develop those ideas without necessarily having to deal with numbers. And then finally, in terms of problem solving, identifying what's clear and confusing in a problem and creating and testing out conjectures is something that can be built with this routine. And so there's more information, again, about notice and wondering. Max Ray wrote a book called Powerful Problem Solving, and you can reference chapter 4 in his book for more information, even more information about notice wonder. So how can you use notice wonder at home or in a virtual learning situation? And we're going to be talking about this for every single routine we have, because we want you to know that everything we share with you, we think can be done and should be done in your school, in classrooms. But then you can also think about how to use them in this virtual learning environment. And one of the lovely things that's come out of this pandemic that we're living in is so many organizations and places have opened up their doors virtually to mass audiences. So for example, museums, zoos, aquariums, national parks, the live streams and the photos and the pictures from those places are available, readily available online. There is a gold mine of images, interesting images that you can play with. This is a fun one. For example, National Geographic is an organization that just recently published the funniest animal pictures in nature. And this is a really good example of, wow, I wonder what that frog ate. So that's a way to think about using this at home. All right, so let's move on to routine number 2. All right, Jen.
Okay, so routine number 2 is a routine called Who's Hiding? And we're going to experience it together quickly. So here's how this routine goes. I'm going to show you a picture, and parts of the picture will be covered. But I'm going to give you a clue to start thinking about who could be hiding. So here's how it goes. Your job is to describe what you see to help think about who could be hiding. Are you ready?
Mhm.
All right. So take a minute. Okay. All right. So how many of you went to naming what it was before actually slowing down to mention what it is that you saw? Guilty. Right, a dog. I saw Miss saying a dog, right? We all want to do that. And that's so common, right? And that's what we do as adults, and it's what kids do in the classroom too. And the goal of the routine is not to name who's hiding initially, but to think about putting together the parts to consider who is hiding, right? And so that really helps us manage impulsivities for ourselves and for kids. And we just want to shout it out. We're not alone. But here's the thing. It's about building a whole from its parts. And that's a critical idea in mathematics that we can play with as early as pre-K and kindergarten, right? And so when we think about problem solving, another critical component to problem solving is not jumping to conclusions. We want to do that all the time, right? We want to slow down and make sense of the problem. So now, given all of that, I'm going to show you another clue, and I want you to describe what you see. Okay, so are you describing what you see? Here are some more clues. All right, can you guess who's hiding? Right? And so now we could say, it's a dog.
And that's my dog as a puppy.
And he's big as a puppy. So here's the thing about this routine. Again, it seems simple, right? But underneath the surface, there's a lot at play here. It really helps develop students' descriptive language, which is really important. And it builds language as the structures of community. So like Notice Wonder, kids are building on ideas from what's being said. So kids might see, I see fur. I think Greg said that in the chat. But then another student could build onto that and say, I see black and brown fur. Right? And again, just like Notice Wonder, we're building confidence. There's no right or wrong answer. Kids are just describing the things that they see. I think a big part of this, though, is managing that impulsivity, right? That's a really big part of the early childhood work that we do with kids. Listening to the ideas of others and building on them is also a really critical piece, but I think what's so big here is the idea to slow down the thinking and attending to details, and that lives in that reasoning goal piece. That's really important. And that helps us go back to this critical idea of building the whole from the parts, right? Creating and testing conjectures. Maybe we thought it was something else, right? Let's see, let's gather more information and make sense of it as we go. And so here, this routine, like we said earlier, seems simple, but is really fun and develops some really deep thinking and habits of mind. So here's the way that we're thinking about who's hiding at home. As Stephanie previously mentioned, the internet is now chock full of resources, and all you need is a printer and some Post-its. And so here's something I created to play with my kids at home. I printed out a picture and I grabbed some Post-its. And as you can see, I was really thinking about indicating which clues I wanted to uncover, when and why. And so here was the whole thing covered, and then I uncovered clue 1, right? And I was like, this is a really funny clue to uncover. It's kind of ambiguous, right? And then it could be a few things here. So I'm really thinking strategically on my part about what I want to uncover and why. And then we can uncover clue 2, which gives you a little bit more information, right? But then when you go to uncover clue 3, you have some further information that can give you a sense of who's hiding. Do we have the final photo there? It's such a great photo. Oh my gosh, I love it. So that's one way that you could do this at home, is just print out a really fun picture, think strategically, cover it with Post-its, and play with your kids at home. But also, if you're looking for digital versions of this game, like the one we previously shared with Tony's dog, if you access her book, that you can also access different examples of this routine as a part of the online resources.
All right, fair, not fair. We're doing pretty well here. I'm wondering if you want to take a few minutes where people could post a couple of questions in the chat. If you have any questions for us before we move on to the next routine.
No question?
Okay, that's great. We're so clear. We can. All right, so this routine is called Fair, Not Fair. And in a classroom, you would start kids off with snack, often their snack in early childhood. And one of the things that happens right away is kids are really, some children, not all children, are attending to what everyone's getting for snack. And the comparison starts. He has more, I have less, things like that. So with this one, we put in a PowerPoint examples of snack, and kids sit in a circle. And we remind them of the work they've been doing around snack and this idea of is it fair or is it not fair? And we show them some images quickly and have them do a thumbs up if it's fair and a thumbs down if it's not fair. And based on the hand signals we see, we can determine, do we want to have a conversation here? Where do we slow down? Where do we speed up? Things like that. So a lot of the routines that are in my book start with that kind of kids sitting in a circle and the teacher getting feedback very quickly by their responses, whether it's thumbs up, thumbs down, things like that. And then you get to decide, this is an interesting spot. I think we could have a nice conversation here. So it's not that you have to have a conversation after each slide. You're monitoring kids' thinking and thinking about the appropriate place to slow down and discuss. So with fair, not fair, the images get shown quickly, and is it fair or not fair? And then we have a conversation. So we're going to walk you through one, and this is a fair, not fair from pre-K. There's many different examples of this, but this is a really early one. And so with the first slide, fair, not fair, right? Fair, not fair. We're imagining your thumbs going up or down. Fair, not fair. Okay, I'm checking for everyone's thumb. Fair, not fair. Stephanie's fingers faster than my mouth. Fair, not fair. Okay, checking my room to see what kids are doing. Fair, not fair. Okay, and then we come back and we have a conversation. So we're going to walk you through a conversation that was actually recorded in the classroom I worked in.
So in this case, the student says, they both have 3, but there's only pretzels on them.
So it's still 3. It looks different.
It's fair. They're the same.
I think it's fair.
It's the same amount.
Why is it always 3?
What if I said, I don't think it's fair?
Then you would be wrong. And that's actually a conversation we had. So if we can go back to the first slide, Steph, this is a pretty obvious one for most students. They assume it's fair because it looks the same, right? However, when you go to the next slide, the orientation changes and some students don't recognize the one on the diagonal as being 3. And so you might have conversation there. In this group, they both recognize that it was a quantity of 3. And so notice the math here is getting kids to subitize quantities, really developing this idea of sight quantities that then help them build the basic facts and develop fluency. So this idea of sight quantities is something I work with a lot in a lot of my quick images that are in the book. The next one, sometimes there's really interesting conversation around fair and not fair because some are tall and thin, some are short and fat. It's like, well, that's not the same. How is it the same? And so you get some rather lively discussions. In this group, the kids right away recognize it's the same amount. So there really wasn't any rich conversation. And I was the teacher that spoke. And I said, well, what if I said it isn't fair? It doesn't look fair. And this one kid just said to me, then you'd be wrong. Like, what's wrong with you, lady? And it was really funny. And it was done in a learning community, and all the teachers and kids burst out laughing. But these activities don't take very long to do, and you're developing some very powerful mathematical ideas with them. So to deconstruct this routine, the repetition of language becomes really important. You're developing precision of language as children try to communicate why they think something is fair and not fair, and the building of academic language, because eventually words like amount, equivalent, equal come into play. The idea, comparing sets, I'm not sure why that's social emotional, but I think that's the wrong place. But the social emotional piece here is really around children learning to listen to the ideas of each other's ideas, defend their ideas, respect that someone could have a divergent point of view. And there's a lot of social emotional that happens that in early learning when someone says, I don't agree.
Tony, can I say, I remember in one of the classroom, in Patricia's classroom early on when you did this, one of the students said, you get what you get and you don't get upset.
Yeah, one of the things, and I write about this in the book, is that you'll have children saying things that they're bringing from home. So when Patricia was saying, is this fair or not fair? And one of the students says, my dad says you get what you get and you don't complain. And you have to think about as a teacher, how do I actually deal with that? So that you're gonna have some interesting conversations, and it's not just about math. The reasoning, the listening to the ideas of others and building on the ideas of others is in the wrong place. That should be moved to social emotional. Mm-hmm. The comparing sets, though, is the big idea. And so when we think about in early mathematics, the idea of magnitude, it comes up very quickly, more or less. Kids can compare quantities, but then actually starting to think about how do I equalize these sets becomes a really big challenge, and that starts happening even in pre-K, but more or less more in K and 1. So some of the other math ideas, as I said, subitizing, creating equivalent sets, the comparison in magnitude, and then the big idea of part-whole relations. So for example, if Stephanie had 5 pretzels and I had 3, and I had to think about how many more pretzels do I need to have the same as Stephanie, I'm comparing those 2 sets and then finding a way to make them equal, where 5 would be the whole, 3 would be one of the parts, and then the unknown part would be the 2 that's missing. That's a really complex idea, and it takes children a lot of time and practice to develop that. All right, how can you use fair, not fair at home or in a virtual learning situation? I think we have some questions coming up. Well, I think we could imagine how we could use this at home. It could be tricky at home because obviously you don't want to start any squabbles among your children about things being fair or not fair. It was actually kind of funny when we first tried this routine out in the classroom, and we gave children different amount of snacks. We gave them goldfish and we gave them different amount of snacks. And it was very quick to see that some students just sat there and they were perfectly satisfied with what they got. And then other students started eyeballing other people's snacks. And those are the kids we looked out for because they were the ones that were already comparing. And I always remember this one little boy saying, hey, Ms. Gallahoo, what happened here? Because he knew that he got less than his neighbor. And it led to a really interesting conversation. And obviously, we weren't trying to be cruel or anything like that. But the idea of comparison, you need something to compare to. All right.
Okay, so routine number 4 is a routine called You Say, I Say. It's fairly new, I would say about a year-ish that we've been playing with this in classrooms. It's in Tony's book. And we'll go through the structure of the activity. Like Tony said, most of her activities start with students sitting in a circle, but this can be adapted really easily, and we'll talk about that on the back end. But here's how the routine goes. So the first person in the game says one word. They pick the word, it could be any word. The second person says, you say whatever the word was. I say the first word that comes to mind. So here's an example. You say blue, I say ocean. okay? Then each player takes the word of the previous person and builds on it using that sentence frame, okay? And then the game continues until all players have had a turn to speak. But here's what happens as the routine is happening. As the children are responding, the teacher or the parent on that matter, if you're at home, takes notes on all the words that are being said, right? And at the end of the routine, they put them up for discussion, right? They're recorded in some fashion, whether in a notebook or on a board or something. And you can talk about the words that came up and think about what surprised you, what do you notice, what do you wonder? So we are going to take a peek into a kindergarten classroom and listen to the children engaging with this routine.
I say spring. You say spring, I say bud. You say bud, I say wings. You say wing, I say fly. You say fly, I say cloud. You say cloud, I say white. You say white, I say carnival. You say carnival, I say soft. You say stop.
Soft.
You say soft, I say couch. You say couch, I say chair. You say chair, I say classroom. You say classroom, I say reading books.
Reading.
You say reading, I say characters. I say characters. You say character, I say learning. You say learning, I say children. You say children, I say boys. You say boys, I say teachers. You say teachers, I say girls. You say girls, I say math. You say math, I say subtraction. You say subtraction, I say add.
Add, okay.
You say add, I say class. You say class, I say teacher. You say teacher, I say girl. I say spring.
Sorry, get to the next page.
All right. So here's the list of the words that were said as they went around the circle. And so at the end, when students came back together, the words were put up and they were asked what they noticed and what wonderings they had. And so what you see highlighted are the things that they noticed, right? And so here's something that you can see in this first yellow highlight with fly and clouds. One student was really surprised to hear clouds after fly. And so what was interesting was that he wasn't thinking of it that way, but it's one way to think about it, that clouds are in the sky and that you fly in the sky, and that's their association. So what you can see here, right, in what's highlighted from fly to clouds and soft to couch and so forth, are how the children are classifying and making associations. It also indicates the pivots in their language, right? So for example, with soft to couch, couch was associated with soft for that kid, right? Because not every couch is soft, but also couch went then to the classification of chair, which is around furniture. So you can think about things in different ways. And the beauty in this routine is that the goal is really about flow and creativity and being in the moment. So when we really think about deconstructing this routine, there really is a lot of richness here. And going through the categories, we can think about that repetition of language is really is a really powerful piece. This idea of the sentence structure saying you say means you're repeating the word that the person in front of you said, and that you're creating that free flow association of your word, right? I know that if you're doing this in person, the idea of making eye contact and turning to look at the person next to you, these ideas of listening and speaking norms, is a huge part of our learning communities when we're in the classroom, but could be really important to indicate that also at home. And it really develops listening skills, right? I need to wait my turn and I need to listen to what you're saying. And then I'm going to build off of that. When we start recording the noticings and having conversations about them, that's when you really slow down to understand. I remember we did this in a learning community last year, and someone said bunny, and then afterwards said pancake. And we all laughed because it was really funny. But then in the conversation afterwards, we said, well, what was the connection between bunny and pancake? And the participant said, well, I had a bunny and her name was Pancake. So there was the fun way that they were associating and classifying, right? So not only is this routine fun and playful, it's really super versatile, and you can adapt it to work with it at home. So as a meta community, we've tried playing this virtually. It feels different than when you play it with a room full of kids. You could play it one-on-one with your own kids at home. You could play it around the dinner table, but you can also try playing it in your virtual learning communities. I know that some people are having Google Meets or Hangouts, but you'd have to play around with that and how you would have to mic and unmic. I know for my second grader, that's a big part of his learning curve at home, is when to mute and unmute, but you could play around with it to generate some kind of back and forth with your community.
I want to add on to what Jen was saying, because this seems like it's a pretty easy game to teach students. It's not. And here's why. The first time we did it in a classroom, the students were so surprised that they were just supposed to say what came into their head, that they were paralyzed with fear that they would say the wrong answer. And we've done it with adults, and we've had the same reaction. So this idea of being present in the moment, of really listening, and then understanding your own process, or that word that comes into your mind without judging it, is very hard to do. And this game is connected to the idea of flow, and creative people that have flow, ideas come to them and they don't judge those ideas. And so we're trying to empower students to be comfortable with their ideas, to share their ideas, to not judge their ideas. And the most surprising moments were when kids were in the moment, and the associations they made and they shared, and you put the list of words on the board and people were like, wow, you thought of cotton ball. That's so surprising. And so we love those surprises, and we're trying to help children become more relaxed in who they are, what they know, and be willing to share their ideas. And so the first time you go to try this, I don't think it's going to be easy. I could be wrong, but every time I've tried it, there's been some hurdles to get over. But it was so funny in the classroom where we tried it out, where the students really struggled. We tried it 3 different times and it didn't work. And then they were going on a trip somewhere, and on the bus, the teacher emailed me and said, you're not going to guess what game the kids were playing on the bus. They were playing You Say, I Say. So there's something very powerful in it when you can be free and just let your ideas flow. All right. So Build Me is a new game. It's an interactive game. There's a video component that goes with it. There's a tutorial that we created to go with it. And it's a pretty easy game, I think, in terms of, well, easy in the simplicity is in the design of it. It's not easy in terms of the thinking. It's something I used to do when I had a math lab way back when in the 90s with my children. We used to do these puzzles with 10 frames, and I would give them clues. And it would be interesting to see who realized they didn't have enough information and who just thought, I can just build it with any clue. So for example, if the first clue says, I use 10 tiles, and you'd have students right away building with 10 tiles, even though there wasn't enough information. So this game is really designed to develop logical thinking. And the clues that get uncovered one at a time, the student gets to choose which clue they want to uncover and in what order. And then there's a level of complexity in some of the language that's used. So this is an example of the 4th game. The first game is relatively easy, and it gets more complex. So in the 4th game, I use 10 tiles. Most students by this point realize they don't know which tiles they're using, so they don't build anything. 1 tile is yellow, is pretty specific. So yeah, 1 tile is yellow. What is the information I'm getting from each clue? and then how do I proceed? So half my tiles are green is a really complex idea in, I would say K-2. You have students puzzling about half. They might know half in an informal way, but to know what it means in relation to 10 tiles is complex. And then my other tiles are blue and red, and so what does that mean? So there's a level of precision and ambiguity in this puzzle that the student has to deal with, and they can deal with it in their own way. So what we want to share now is one of our colleagues, Michael Casaro, tested this game out with his child, James. And it's a short clip, but what we want you to think about is how is a student interacting with the puzzle, and then how is the parent, Michael's the parent, how is the parent interacting with the student to support their thinking? And one thing to think about is it's not just about developing problem-solving skills, it's about developing habits of mind related to problem solving. All right.
Hey, Tony, before you play the video, is this where you would like for me to just pause the recording?
Yes, please.
Okay.
All right. All set, Greg?
Does anyone, Steph and Jen, should we stop the presentation and just see if anyone has any questions?
Sure.
Because we have a few more slides, but I think you've gotten enough out of this by now, and maybe you have a couple of questions you'd like.
And we'll share the PowerPoint with Greg, right? So that'll be available. Oops.
So Steph, Jen, and Tony, would you like people to raise their hand, use the raise their hand icon, or to post their questions right in the chat? How would you like to do that?
In the chat. How would we get access to PowerPoint? Someone asked. I think Greg will post it, right, Greg? Or should we have people email us and send it to them?
I'm trying to think how I could go about posting it where it would be accessible for everyone. I don't have.
Yeah, well, why don't we have people just email us, and then if you're interested, we'll send you the PowerPoint. Obviously, you can't have the video because that would be illegal, but the other things you can have.
So somebody asked, is this game available now? And it is. If you go to our website, metamorphosislc.com, there's a resources page. And on the resources page, not only will you find the game itself, but you'll find an interactive tutorial that Tony, myself, and Tony's co-creator, Daniel, filmed as an interactive tutorial to teach parents and teachers how to use this game. I'm writing in our email addresses as we speak into the chat.
And as Steph is doing that, we shared a couple of things today. In my book, there's a website that's attached to the book, and in that website are all kinds of PowerPoints for things we didn't even get to today, like PowerPoints for quick images, PowerPoints for Is It Fair? There's quite a wealth of materials that I put online because as a teacher, I know I love having access to things that I can use once I really like what something is. So you have access to other materials, and it just doesn't have to be what's in the PowerPoint. However, the Who's Hiding with the Puzzle is something my niece designed for me, so that's not actually on the website, although there are some PowerPoints for Who's Hiding. All right, I think that does it for today. Thank you guys for hanging out with us for an hour. This was fun.
Yeah, thank everyone. Thank you all. Thank you, Greg.
Well,
Bye-bye.
Tony, Stephanie, and Jen, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today and for rescheduling after a false start last week. So I look forward to chatting more with you. And depending on how long schools are closed, I'm not going to try to predict. I would love to maybe continue this conversation, or if you have other things that you'd like to share in the future, I look forward to those types of collaborations.
All right, fabulous. Thanks so much, everybody.
Right.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Be well.